What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with the box office breakdown for Sunday, April 19th, where a huge shocker, the Super Mario Galaxy movie is still number one and is now at $747 million globally.
My Koopas! Your king has returned!
And at the same time, like we've seen the last few weeks, Project Hail Mary is still the number two movie. It's now up to $573 million globally. So with those two movies doing as well as they have, it's created very little room for newcomers. But we did have a newcomer this weekend in the form of Lee Cronin's The Mummy, which opened to about $13.5 million domestically with an additional $7.9 million from global box office. Now keep in mind that Lee Cronin's The Mummy only had a budget of $22 million. So it'll be a profitable movie. But the question is, how do we want to compare its success to other Blumhouse movies? And more importantly, how do we want to compare its success or lack thereof to other movies with The Mummy in the title? And apparently the main reason it's called Lee Cronin's The Mummy is that Universal has yet another Mummy movie in the works, an extension of the Brendan Fraser franchise, which started back in 1999.
You have unleashed the creature that we have feared for more than 3,000 years. Is the bringer of death. He will never stop.
But just as a basis for comparison, let's start with Lee Cronin's previous movie, Evil Dead Rise, which opened to $24.5 million back in 2023. And that movie originally was intended just for HBO Max, and at the last minute, like, you know what, let's put it in theaters and just see how it does. It had a budget of $15 million, and I believe it grossed $150. Hang on one sec. Yeah, I'm seeing here that Evil Dead Rise eventually made it to $147 million globally off a budget of $15 million. For a debut feature film by a new director, he'd made some shorts, but that was his debut feature film. You really couldn't ask for a better success story. That is just the absolute pitch perfect home run. Like, what do you want to do next? So it's odd that he would choose to dust off, and quite literally dust off this old property, The Mummy, which has been floating around Hollywood since 1932 when Universal first made it with Boris Karloff back in the day. And I tried to find information on the box office and budget of The Mummy from 1932 to get an additional angle for comparison. And while we know the budget, unadjusted for inflation, was $196,000 back in 1932, the records for box office back then were so unreliable, they don't really know how well it performed, but it performed well enough that Universal continued to make Mummy movies in the subsequent years. But getting back to Lee Cronin, if your debut feature film grosses 10 times its budget, I feel like that's the time where you roll the dice, take a chance, and do something original. But instead, he decided to go to Blumhouse. And if you follow this channel for any length of time, you'll know I'm unimpressed by Blumhouse overall. Like I always say, Blumhouse makes horror movies for people who don't want their horror movies to be but so scary or but so disturbing. Usually they have happy endings where everybody kind of goes home and lives happily ever after. And they just don't make the kind of horror movies that I'm looking for. But if you want to compare Lee Cronin's The Mummy to other Blumhouse movies that have similar goals in mind, we have Wolfman from 2025. That movie opened at $10.5 million and eventually capped out at $35 million. It was a total catastrophe, and justifiably so. Wolfman was an absolutely terrible movie. And then we have The Invisible Man, and it eventually went on to gross $144 million globally. I suspect that Lee Cronin's The Mummy, in terms of the total box office tally, once it reaches the end of its run, will probably be somewhere between Wolfman and The Invisible Man. Probably just successful enough where both Lee Cronin as well as Blumhouse can chalk it up as a win, but not a smash. It'll be successful, but not a home run, where obviously a movie like Evil Dead Rise was an absolute smash. That was a complete and total home run. But if you want to know how Lee Cronin's The Mummy compares to some other movies with The Mummy in the title, back in 1999, off a production budget of $80 million, the Brendan Fraser Mummy, that opened to $43.4 million, but went on to gross $416 million worldwide, and that is why they are still making Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser in 2026. And then there was the effort in 2017 to launch the so-called Dark Universe, where Universal was going to do big budget adaptations of all their classic monsters and basically try to turn it into like an MCU-style shared universe. So The Mummy in 2017, it opened to $31.7 million, but it had a budget of $125 million, and it only ended up grossing about $409 million worldwide. And while I might think that actress Sofia Boutella is very easy on the eyes, I never ended up seeing The Mummy from 2017, primarily due to that really weird trailer which came out ahead of its release. And I mentioned this in my review for Lee Cronin's The Mummy, but for people who don't remember, 9 years ago, the first trailer for The Mummy, they did something weird with the sound where like the sound mix was incomplete. It didn't have the music or the sound effects. It just had like a few voices. And so when the trailer first came out, people were like, what the fuck is this? Is this like a parody video or what's going on here? But I feel like the first trailer that you launch with or the first poster that you put out into the public, these are all very important first impressions. And if your first impression is that a movie's ridiculous, well, then it's going to be an uphill battle from that point onward.
No!
But it must also be said that the 2017 version of The Mummy was directed by none other than Alex Kurtzman. And for anybody who's been following his work over the last 10 or 15 years or even longer, everything Alex Kurtzman touches turns to dog shit. I think he might be a strong contender for my least favorite storyteller in all of entertainment right now, whether he's writing, producing, directing, for the big screen or the small screen. I just loathe everything about him, and I know this is supposed to be a box office breakdown, not a rant about Alex Kurtzman, but even his interviews about whatever projects he's working on, I'm like, you're the most insufferable, annoying person that works in Los Angeles. Please stop subjecting us to your shows and movies, which might have been another reason why I did not see The Mummy back in the day. At any rate, this is all just a very long-winded way of saying that I think Lee Cronin's The Mummy is doing respectable business, but not spectacular business. And I think it's highly unlikely that Blumhouse will be making more Mummy movies anytime in the near future.
Don't worry, Grandma. It's fun to be dead.
But Lee Cronin could have a very respectable career in horror moving forward, because there were people out there who did enjoy Lee Cronin's The Mummy more than I did. I wasn't all that impressed with it. I felt like he basically was trying to do a movie like The Exorcist that kind of turns into The Evil Dead at the end, but calling it The Mummy, and he didn't really embrace the idea of making like a full-blown Mummy movie. But he obviously has chops, and he obviously has fans. Between Evil Dead Rise and The Mummy, he's earned himself a following. My advice to him would be go to Neon or go to A24 or go to Focus Features and try to do an original movie. Make a movie for the same budget as Evil Dead Rise, but prove that he can make a movie based on his own ideas that is not based on pre-existing IP like The Mummy or Evil Dead. Prove that he can be the next Osgood Perkins or the next Damian McCarthy or the next Robert Eggers. There are filmmakers out there right now making original movies within the horror genre. Of all the genres out there right now within the movie biz, filmmakers have the most freedom to tell original stories within the horror genre. So I'm sure Lee Cronin has an old screenplay gathering dust in a drawer somewhere that he wrote when he was like an undergrad in college or something like that. Dust off an original idea and prove what a Lee Cronin movie can be, and also get the hell away from Blumhouse. Blumhouse, they make lukewarm kind of milquetoast horror. I feel like Lee Cronin, you can tell he likes going to the dark side with like the gore and the nasty side. I don't think his movies are that scary, but they're definitely disgusting. Like, go make a movie like Terrifier 3 where you can just embrace like your darkest impulses, or whoever, I can't remember which studio released Terrifier 3, but maybe Lee Cronin can pitch an idea to them. But I feel like Blumhouse is where horror goes to die. And apart from their Five Nights at Freddy movies in recent years, it's tough to think of a successful horror movie that they have made in the last 5 years, apart from the Invisible Man. And there was one other new release this past weekend, which opened at number 7. Normal, starring Bob Odenkirk, opened at $2.65 million, which suggests to me maybe this brief fad or brief craze where we perceive Bob Odenkirk as an action star might be drawing to a close. Because for people who don't know, Bob Odenkirk is one of the funniest people on planet Earth. In the 1990s, between like the Larry Sanders Show and the Ben Stiller Show and things like that, I mean, he's just got comedy in his bones, is in his DNA. And I thought Better Call Saul was such a great show because it combined his vicious sense of humor with like a great drama. And I don't know if this is heresy to say or not, I thought Better Call Saul was a better show than Breaking Bad. As far as spin-off shows, you really can't ask for a better success than Better Call Saul. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Bob Odenkirk. And I thought it was cool when he made Nobody and was breaking bones and kicking ass. But I don't want to see him exclusively as like, a tired old man getting into fight scenes. I just feel like, let him put his wit and his sense of humor to good use. But maybe Normal will be the last of the action fad starring Bob Odenkirk. But coming up this weekend, we have a movie which I think is going to seriously shake up the status quo. We have Michael, and I don't know if that movie's going to underperform or overperform. I'm seeing it on Wednesday. I'll have a better idea once I've seen the movie. But if the movie's even pretty good, I think it's going to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year, because while he's a superstar in America, he's an even bigger star internationally. And I feel like a good comp for how well the movie might do would be a movie like Bohemian Rhapsody back in 2018. And that movie opened to $50 million domestic and $125 million worldwide in its opening weekend. If Michael can generate those kinds of numbers, I think it might end up grossing, $750 million worldwide, or if it's really good, we might be talking about the first musical to cross the billion mark. I don't think any musical has ever crossed the billion mark. I guess it depends on how loosely you define musical, but Michael Jackson, I mean, he was the biggest pop star of the 20th century, and most people that are still alive now, of a certain age, remember how big he was. So I have a feeling that a lot of people will be going back and they'll be dragging their kids and their grandkids. Who knows how well it'll do, but I'll be reviewing it Wednesday night, and I'll be hoping for the best. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have this weekend to wrap up, so let's head over to Variety, where Brent Lang has us covered with an article titled Box Office, Super Mario Galaxy Movie Easily Tops Charts with $35 million. Lee Cronin's The Mummy debuts at $13.5 million. The Super Mario Galaxy Movie easily retained its box office crown in its third weekend of release, topping the charts with $35 million. The Universal and Illumination release is already the year's highest-grossing film, having earned $355.2 million domestically and $747.5 million globally, and seems destined to eclipse the $1 billion mark worldwide. At this rate, expect the studios to get more Mario into production as fast as they can level up, and Nintendo will allow it. Let me pause real quick. There's nothing more annoying when box office analysts try a little bit too hard to incorporate terminology or language related to the topic into their box office reports, because in most Mario games, you don't level up. There are plenty of games out there where you do level up. They're called role-playing games, but Mario primarily was like a 2D platformer back in the day. Anyway, I just feel like it comes across like they're trying a little too hard when they try to shove in terminology that doesn't seem quite to fit. At least it doesn't seem to fit when it comes to the topic at hand, namely Mario. But back to the article. Amazon MGM Studios' Project Hail Mary also shone brightly in its fifth weekend of release, picking up $20.5 million for a second-place finish that brings the Sci-Fi Adventures domestic gross to a stellar $285.1 million. However, the continued success of the Super Mario Galaxy movie and Project Hail Mary made it difficult for newcomers to gain much traction. Lee Cronin's The Mummy had to settle for third in its debut weekend, earning a so-so $13.5 million. The Warner Brothers and New Line release didn't cost much to make, carrying a budget of $22 million, but its final tally will be a far cry from the nearly $150 million that Cronin's 2023 film Evil Dead Rise collected. Horror maestros James Wan and Jason Blum produced The Mummy through their production banners Atomic Monster and Blumhouse Productions, and it continues their run of monster movies, falling somewhere between 2020's well-received The Invisible Man, $144.5 million globally, and 2025's lamentable Wolfman, $35.2 million globally. The weekend's other new wide release, Magnolia is Normal, took 7th place, earning $2.5 million. The action film stars Bob Odenkirk as a small-town sheriff who stumbles on a larger conspiracy following a local bank robbery. Ben Wheatley, who has developed a reputation for boundary-pushing ultra-violence with the likes of Free Fire and High Rise, directs. Hang on one sec. I had no idea that Ben Wheatley directed that movie. But once upon a time, Ben Wheatley was quite a different kind of director. Maybe because some of those art house films that he made were not successful, he's had to start making movies like Normal. But I'm blanking. Kill List. That's what I was trying to think of. Kill List back in 2011. When I saw that, I was like, holy shit. Who's this Ben Wheatley guy? And he got on my radar in a big bad way. Since then, what have I seen? A Field in England was super artsy-fartsy, but interesting if you're into super artsy-fartsy stuff. I think even Scorsese was a producer on it. What else does he have? High Rise was interesting. Free Fire was entertaining enough. Oh, he did the 2020 remake of Rebecca. In any case, he works. Oh, he did Meg 2, The Trench. Holy shit. He's not afraid to kind of be a genre hopper and work on different projects. He even directed an episode of Generation Z. But for a guy who, at least my first impression was Kill List, I was expecting him to go in a very different direction with his career from Normal. But I'll be rooting for him every step of the way because he's got some serious directing chops. In its third weekend of release, A24's buzzy relationship comedy, The Drama, took 4th place, earning $4.8 million. The indie film, which stars Zendaya and Robert Pattinson, has earned an impressive $39.7 million. That's good news because Zendaya and Pattinson will appear together in 3 films this year, popping up in Dune Part 3 and The Odyssey. Not that those blockbuster films will rise or fall on their chemistry alone. Also, I find it hilarious that he's describing the film as a buzzy relationship comedy. I mean, I guess that's one way of looking at it, but it's also a really dark, disturbing, like dark comedy or social satire. But maybe this box office analyst has not seen The Drama, so they don't know just how depraved it gets at certain points in the movie. But just to wrap up the article, rounding out the top 5, Universal's rom-com You, Me, and Tuscany picked up $3.8 million to bring its haul to $14.4 million after 2 weeks in theaters. And limited release focus features Lorne, a documentary about SNL creator Lorne Michaels, debuted to $270,000 from 415 theaters, while A24's Mother Mary earned $168,000 from just 5 locations. So long story short, this past weekend kind of felt like the calm before the storm, because once Michael comes out, I feel like there are a lot of potential blockbusters for the next couple of months as we ease into the summer movie season. Like, Mandalorian and Grogu tickets are now on sale. We have like Toy Story 5, I think, coming in June. But there are a lot of big movies on the horizon. Obviously, The Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day and all that stuff. But this week, I'm seeing Hokum on Tuesday at an early access screening, as well as Michael on Wednesday. And for people who don't follow indie horror, Hokum is from director Damien McCarthy, an Irish filmmaker whose previous 2 movies, Caveat and Oddity, I'm a big fan of. I rewatched Caveat the other night, and it's a slow burn movie with a minuscule budget. And like as you're watching the movie, you're like, wait, is this even a horror movie? It's just kind of like a subdued thriller. What's going on here? But in the last 10 or 15 minutes, it absolutely becomes a really disturbing horror movie. And just in case you haven't seen it, I don't want to give anything away, but you will never hear the sound of a saw going through wood and have the same reaction ever again. And even though I first saw Caveat like a year or so ago, to the present day, there are times where I wake up in the middle of the night and I look up at the door to my bedroom and I think I see something that is one of the final shots in the movie. For people who have seen the movie, they know exactly what I'm talking about. But any horror movie that's still giving me kind of like the heebie-jeebies or sleepless nights more than a year later, that's a filmmaker who really understands kind of like the subtle sorcery of creating a really cool horror movie. So I'm really looking forward to Hokum on Tuesday night. But I think that's all I've got to say for this week. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, become a member, all that good stuff. Hope everybody has an amazing week, and I'll be back at you probably Wednesday morning with a review for Hokum. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.